The Bookshelf with Ryan Tubridy is brought to you by Eason, Ireland's favourite bookseller. Unwrap the magic of Christmas gifting with books from Eason this festive season, where they've created hundreds of the best new titles available to help you find the perfect presents for all the special people in your life. And sure, you might even pick up one of the books we discuss with our guest on this episode. Or maybe you'll opt for this week's Ryan Recommends book, which I'll discuss with you at the end of the episode. As ever, all the books we discuss on this episode of our podcast are available now in your local Eason store, or indeed order online from easons.com before 6 p.m. for same-day dispatch with free delivery when you spend over a tenner. Eason, be inspired. Today on The Bookshelf, I'm really pleased, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart, to welcome someone who's been a cornerstone of broadcasting in Ireland for decades, from his time hosting the longest running chat show in the world, which we have in common. We'll talk about that later on. To his incredibly popular radio programmes and beyond. His influence on the landscape of Irish media is immense, and anyone who's had the privilege of following in his footsteps can attest to just how much he's shaped the industry. There's so much to talk about, but we're going to talk today about the man behind the microphone, as he's going to share stories through the prism, as we like to say, of a book from his childhood, a book that made him cry, and a book that changed his life. Pat Kenny, welcome to The Bookshelf.
Ryan, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
You know, something that strikes me about you now after the passage of time is how well you look. And I know this is part of the YouTube
genetic
thing. Okay.
Genetic.
Is it genetic?
Simply that.
No, because you always look fit and well and young. I don't know what age you are. I don't want to ask you what age you are unless you want to admit it. That's okay with me. But you just look great.
I was born in 1948, so people who can do sums can work it out. I walk the dog every day, 5 or 6 kilometres every day, come rain or shine, and that's about it. Play a bit of golf in the summer.
Tennis?
Bit of tennis, maybe a bit of pedal, you know, the new sport,
you're enjoying
which is
that.
Great, yeah. Love that.
You say 1948 you're born in. Tell us a little bit about where you were born and the house you grew up in. I want to get a sense of you under the age of 10 or 11.
I was born in Holles Street, grew up on Infirmary Road beside the Phoenix Park, close to where my father worked, Dublin Zoo. So although we had a very nice house, 3-storey red brick house, I think it used to be home to maybe British Army officers before they left in a huff.
It's the pause there.
But there were no back gardens to these houses. So we had a backyard in which we placed the coal. So our back garden was the Phoenix Park.
Yeah.
So we roamed all day, every day in the summer holidays, endlessly without any supervision.
Yeah, lovely.
Magnificent.
What, we being who?
My older brother Paul, my younger brother Frank, his twin sister Mary, and younger sister Anne-Marie. 5 of us in all.
Okay. Were you close to the gang?
All very close. I mean, there was a slight gap between the twins and Anne-Marie. There was a 5-year gap. But other than that, Paul was first, a year and a half later me, 2.5 years later twins, then a gap. I don't blame my mother for having a gap, by the way.
I appreciate that. In a quintet like that, because I come from a quintet and I was born in Holles Street, we have more in common than we might think. But the point I'm making is, in a quintet like that, you have essentially almost like a boy band or a girl band. There's one of everything. Was it like that? You weren't obviously of a type. I mean, everyone had the
everyone was different, but we did things in common. For instance, the boys all worked in a place called Hodger's Laboratories during the summer holidays, developing and printing photographs, which were then distributed to pharmacies, to chemist shops all around the country. So we all worked from the age, in my case, from the age of 13.
Yeah, good. So work ethic coming from
dad and mother, both very hardworking people.
Tell me about your mum. I'm intrigued. What was her name? And
her real name was Connie, but her real name was Teresa, but everyone called her Connie. And that was an old term, I believe, for someone who was kind of a bonny baby. They used to call him, she's a real Connie young one. Okay. And that stuck. So she became Connie for the rest of her life. But her proper name was Teresa. Dublin, yeah.
And tell us about her in as much as you know, because sometimes our mothers get detached from
Well, my
the women
mother was one of a large family, and she was probably bright enough to go to university, wanted to advance herself, but was taken out of school at the age of 15, 16 to go to commercial college and become, a bookkeeper or whatever, which she did. And later on, she did bookkeeping for me, which the talent was not wasted. Yeah, it was. She was very good and very rigorous and very methodical. But she would have benefited from university. Her brothers went to college, but she and her sisters did not.
As was often the way.
As was often the way.
And what a theft of someone's
So her ambition for her family was to go to college and get an education. Yeah. She realized education was opening all the doors.
Okay.
And so from a very early age, we were told we didn't have a lot of money. My father had a very humble job. So the idea was, is there a scholarship? Yes, there is. A Dublin Corporation scholarship. Well, you guys are going to try and get that. So instead of going to the nearest school, we went to the school that was designed to get your scholarship, O'Connell Schools on the North Circular Road.
She knew what she was doing.
She knew what she was doing.
So she had this ambition for her boys and girls.
Absolutely.
Was she warm?
Yeah, I mean, mothers are warm, but
not all of them.
Yeah, no. She was a warm woman, but she could have her moments, shall we say?
What does that mean?
Well, that it wasn't kind of all her children are wonderful all the time. I mean, the modern parenting seems to be your children, no matter what they do, how they behave, they're all wonderful, they're great. She would have had a reasonably stern attitude when we wronged.
Yeah. You knew all about it.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and my father was much more laissez-faire, but if you did offend, like for example, one day, I think we taught my youngest sister, who was 7 years younger than me, to curse. And discipline followed, shall we say.
That is amazing that you completely remember that.
Oh, I completely remember that. Absolutely. Because he as I say, he wasn't a very difficult man with his children, but in cases like that, he drew the line.
And is that a wooden spoon, or is it a wrap it across the knuckles?
It would have been the leather belt, take it off. But it wouldn't have been cruel. I mean, we were getting much worse in school, in fact, every day from the Christian Brothers and the lay teachers in O'Connell's.
Were you one of those boys that we hear as men now talk about the Christian Brothers being pretty brutal?
I'm not scarred by it.
No, I'm not asking were you scarred. I'm asking, did you get the whack?
Oh, yeah, everybody did. And
tell us, because there's a generation listening to this going, what are they talking about? Like, put it into, you're a man of facts. What happened?
There was don't forget, you could have, in primary school, 50 kids in the classroom. In secondary school, 33, 34 kids in the classroom. Yeah. Discipline was difficult. So they ruled with an iron hand.
And again, give us an sense
For example, someone messing at the back of the class, instead of, Tubridy, keep quiet there, the duster would be picked up and flung down the classroom, narrowly missing young Tubridy's ears.
Yeah.
And we accepted that was the law of the classroom jungle.
Were you happy in school? Did you like it?
I can't say I was happy in school. Yeah. I was good at school. I was lucky enough to have the mental acuity to do well in school. And when you were doing well, you could keep your head down. And
why not happy?
Because I think it was at the time the discipline, the intensity of it. I mean, it got a scholarship, so I'm ever grateful to the Christian Brothers for getting me scholarships in primary school and in secondary school, an intermediate scholarship, a Leaving Cert scholarship. So I'm forever grateful. But I know that someone without the equipment that I had to get through school, in terms of the academics of it, might have suffered far more mentally than I did.
So you carry that gratitude?
Oh yeah, I do, absolutely. I mean, it opened the door, from Christian Brothers School to engineering college to Atlanta, Georgia to study there, and
on and on.
The rest is history, yeah.
You were you a great student, or did you have to learn to be a good student?
No, I mean, this is all about
Were you a natural?
Books. We read books constantly at home. We didn't have a library at home, where you'd go to a modern house and there's books everywhere. We didn't. But my father used the library, and we used the library from the earliest of ages. Yeah. And we also got a gift from my uncles on my mother's side, who were then adults. They gave us Arthur Mee's Children's Encyclopedia, which was an interesting construct, a man who was really into educating young boys and girls as best they could be. And I looked it up online because we no longer have those encyclopedias. They've long fallen apart. But they were in sections. Instead of having a volume which had everything about geography and a volume that had everything about archaeology, every volume you got had different sections about the different subjects. And then you built up the entire collection based on these little chapters. So the chapters were familiar things, Wonder by the Wise Man, whoever he was.
Yeah.
Nature by Ernest Bryant and Edward Stepp. The Earth by Dr. Caleb Salibi. All Countries by Francis Epps. Great Lives, Golden Deeds, Bible Stories, Famous Books, then poetry, school lessons by several writers, including Arthur's sister Lois. And my favourite bit was Things to Make and Things to Do.
Yes.
And I would religiously get each of the volumes of the encyclopedia and find that section and try to make the things, like an electric battery, for example, at home.
Is this your book from your childhood that you're picking? By that matter of interest, or not?
It is and it isn't. It's one of the key books in my
because this says everything. Everyone would to people who don't know you, and which is very few people listening to this podcast, but people who do will always describe Pat Kenny as having an encyclopedic knowledge of
Arthur Me. There's your man.
Now we know why, because you were gobbling up the encyclopedia as a kid.
Gobbling up the encyclopedia. And, as I say, trying to replicate the things that
That's amazing.
Encyclopedia was
so
telling
that
us to do.
curiosity was matched by a sense of wanting to do it, not just to say, oh, that's nice. I'd be kind of going, oh, that's an engine. That's great. You're saying, like, how do I make it? Or
but you do have kind of misadventures. I remember we got a new vacuum cleaner, an Electrolux, and we already had an ancient Hoover. So I figured I wanted an electric motor that I could make a trolley out of. So I decided to take the Hoover apart and make my little trolley with the electric motor. Now, I didn't have a car battery for it or anything like that. And in any event, it would have needed 220 volts, not 12. Anyway, that's beside the point. But then, after I'd taken it apart, I realised it could not be put together again, because one of my implements, I think, was a tin opener or a can opener. Anyway, when my father came home, he saw what I'd done. And he said, but I was keeping that to vacuum the soot from the fire. I didn't want to use the new vacuum cleaner.
Yeah. He had it locked away.
Yes, that was his plan.
It was a great plan.
Yeah, but I took it apart.
Yeah, and was the belt removed again?
No. He understood that was a scientific endeavour that had gone slightly awry.
You got a pass there. Your dad sounds intriguing. So he worked in the zoo, the Dublin Zoo, and tell us a bit about him. Again, a Dub as well, a Dublin man?
A Dub, and he went to another Christian Brothers school and had to leave. He went into, at the age of 14, 15, to get a job, because that's what the family required. And he went into the drawing office of what was then the Great Southern Railway, which became CIE. And I don't want to talk to you about CIE
you don't.
And the destruction that your
My grandfather
wrought on the network.
Join us next week and Pat and myself have it out over Todd Andrews and his approach to transport in Ireland. But yeah,
anyway,
so
he went into the drawing office because he was actually very good at art.
Okay.
And but he had very light blue eyes, Paul Newman-esque kind of eyes. And he was in the drawing office, and the carbon arc lamps were burning the eyes out of his head. The carbon arc lamps were used to copy blueprints. So although he liked the work, every day he'd come home and his eyes would be tearing up and red-rimmed and so on. So one day he went to his father, who was in Dublin Zoo, and said, any chance of a job in Dublin Zoo?
What a change, a leap.
A leap. So he went into Dublin Zoo, and his father was the elephant keeper in Dublin Zoo, and he followed ultimately in his father's footsteps. But his mother, my grandmother, was furious that he should give up a permanent pensionable job in the Great Southern Railway in exchange for life in the zoo, which wasn't very well paid at all. But I have to say that his life was hard-working, but very happy, because in the summer he worked all the hours that God sends. He worked even on Christmas Day. He would have to go up and feed and water the animals.
Of course he did. I never thought of that. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So he would come back from that later on in the day, having done his day's work. But in the wintertime, he would have relatively quiet times. Very few visitors in Dublin Zoo in those days. I think it's much more a 365 days of the year job. So he would read and read and read and read.
Really?
He was the reader in our family, not my mother, who was bent on education, but my father was the reader. And I still have a vision in my mind's eye of we had this kind of chaise longue thing, a very ancient thing, and he would recline on it in a room in which we had the television set, not one of the television sets, the television set. And he would have a radio on a shelf over his head.
Yeah.
He would have the television on in the corner. He'd have a book, obviously sometimes on his chest, and a newspaper. This was how he spent his evenings.
This is you're describing you. I mean, this is remarkable. You're talking about being your father's son. I've worked with you. I've seen you've got eyes on everything. You have to for your job. We'll come to that in a minute. Your dad sounds really interesting. That he'd be working in the zoo with the elephants, kind of like with a bucket of feed
in the
one
winter
hand.
time. You see, he could do that. He could sit.
Right, but he'd have a bucket in one hand and a book in the other. I mean, he was this sort of. I don't know how you describe it, but artistic zookeeper or whatever you want to call it.
But there's a funny thing that I learned, talking with my father over the years before he died, and what would he be now? He'd be 106 if he were still alive.
Yeah.
His final sister died a few months ago, Nora, at the age of 105.
Wow, that's longevity for you.
Longevity, absolutely.
Wow.
And in great shape until the last few months of her life.
Did you then, as young Pat, as a boy, was the zoo sort of not quite your back garden? Did you go up and see Dad at work and help out or hang out?
In the summer when we were young children, before we got the job in Hodges Laboratories, we would bring him up a hot lunch every day that my mother would make for him. And it's funny, we didn't realise we were following in his siblings' footsteps who used to bring their father up lunch every day. And the elephant, in those days, the elephant had a view of the main drag of Dublin Zoo running right down to the gate, past the lion house and the monkey house. And when my aunts used to go up with the lunch for their father, the elephant would spy them and ring a bell.
Oh, that sounds like Pavlov's elephant.
They would see the lunch arriving.
Wow. Can you still smell the zoos and the smells from that time?
The smells today are not the same smells because obviously things are done rather differently, and the food they get is different.
Yes. But do you recollect, if I say to you the smell, you've got the smell of the zoo?
I know the smell of the reptile house. I know the smell of the monkey house.
All the different ones.
All different smells.
Amazing. Still.
What you remember of, my father had a responsibility ultimately for the carnivores, included the hippos and rhinos and camels and giraffes, as well as the elephants. But the sandpaper quality of a giraffe's tongue is something that stays with me, because in those days you were allowed to feed the giraffes a little tray. You'd pay for a little tray of dog biscuits. That's what they were. They were dog biscuits. And the giraffe would stick out a long tongue and take the dog biscuit from your hand, and in so doing would lick your hand like sandpaper. and the hairs on an elephant's back are like wire.
Right.
So those kind of things that you remember. And the biggest thrill of my Late Show tenure was riding in on the back of an elephant.
I remember that.
A live elephant.
Toy show?
Toy show. Health and safety would not allow your successor to do that these days.
No elephants for the late these days.
I mean, he can wear a Stetson, but he cannot.
He cannot. Oh gosh, and God, we battled for years to try and get a monkey on the show, but some would argue. Anyway, let's keep going, because I want to ask you a bit about then. You're kind of in school. I'm asking the book from your childhood. Are we going with the encyclopedias? Would you like to suggest another one?
I'd like to go to the books that kept me going.
Yeah, let's do that.
Entertain me.
Yeah.
Biggles.
Oh, okay.
I don't know whether you ever came across
he came up in another podcast about
and William, when we were younger, William.
Just William?
A series of books. William again. All these William books written by a woman called Richmond Crompton. And we just loved those.
Yeah.
Because he was a bold boy.
Well,
he was a naughty boy.
Colm Meaney, who you'll know and have.
He went to O'Connell's as well.
He went to your school. So he was a guest on this season of the podcast, mentioned Biggles. And Billy Bunter, I think, came up as well.
Billy Bunter, not so much, because Billy Bunter was a comic figure in comics.
Okay.
But Biggles were, no pictures.
So the point I'm making is, I suppose, in some sense, is that here you both were in this school, bit of a rough and tumble school with the Christian Brothers, with one hand on the chalk and the other rolled up in a fist. And yet you're reading these really quintessential English stories.
Absolutely.
Like, hello, Biggles, he's just off the plane. You're dealing with that.
And the man who wrote them, Captain W.E. Johns, he died only in 1968, and he had written over 100 Biggles books before he died.
So the library was busy for you then?
The library's busy, back and forth to either Cable Street Library or Charleville Mall beside the North Strand, where the bombs dropped during World War II.
So you were doing a lot of reading as a child. You were doing little experiments at home, and you're clearly really smart. This comes as no surprise. Were you able to have fun?
Oh, I mean, the Phoenix Park was our fun.
Okay, that was your running around and like a Labrador.
I know every inch of that park.
I bet.
The dog pond where myself and one of my childhood pals, Ernesto Pelosi, who his father was running the local Italian restaurant, Chipper, really, and ice cream parlour.
As the Italians in Ireland do, the best ever.
Yeah, absolutely the best ever. And we used to make, out of orange boxes, we'd make boats to sail on the dog pond. And
so you're into Huckleberry Finn territory here.
Yeah, absolutely. Refining the design of our boats to try and make them get across the dog pond. And often we would be becalmed, leaving the boats out there. And then we'd have to peg rocks in to try and generate waves to get the boats back to shore. So it was that part of childhood, ranging the Phoenix Park, the 15 acres, the Furry Glen for those long summer days. And no mobile phones, no one tracking you.
Yeah.
God knows what we got up to. And there were ne'er-do-wells up in the Phoenix Park as well. And we knew them, and we knew to stay away from them. There was a legendary flasher who used to wheel a bike, and he used to wear a long Macintosh, almost classical flasher.
I was going to say classic flasher, yeah.
And we knew to stay away from
So you'd veer at the side of the bike and the Mac, veer right.
Yeah. And we were faster than he was anyway, even on the bike. We scampered everywhere.
Did you ever see any of the presidents walking along? Because, you have the Oris.
Well, there was a legend that Sean T. O'Kelly used to nip out the back of the Oris to have a pint or two or a number of whiskies in the hole in the wall.
Is that right?
But I never clapped eyes on any of them.
You left school, the O'Connell's days came behind you. You've talked about this idea of scholarships and so forth. So you get to university. Did you have on your list? Look at what you have as an influence. You've got your mum, who's ambitious for you all. You've got your dad, who's this an elephant keeper, but probably had these ambitions or at least love of the arts and reading and news.
Absolutely. I was going to say,
so interesting. It's like an everyman.
I forgot to mention earlier that when you say here you've got this working man who's into history, reading history and all of that, but his contemporaries would often go, and if you've got to think back, you're talking about the 1920s. 1930s, they would go to the Gaiety or the Olympia up to the gods and watch opera.
Yeah.
And they could actually sing songs from opera off the top of their heads.
You reminded me of Christy Dignam, who used to talk about, I'm sure he told you this as well, about his father listening to, the great tenors and singers. And that was their backdrop. It wasn't all Elvis and the Beatles, of course, because we're back a generation.
But their popular song might have been opera.
Yeah.
And if they did a party piece, it might have been something from the opera.
And of course, Elvis, It's Now or Never, is O Sole Mio.
Indeed.
So they're all, it's all derivative, isn't it, in some ways? When you went to college and you were applying to go to do the course, did you have a spectrum of things you'd like to do, or was it always going to be the one thing?
No, we were pushed in a particular direction by the Christian Brothers. I loved French, for example, but because I wasn't an A student in French, we had a teacher who taught us to learn our essays off by heart.
Aye.
So, one of them was bound to come up, one of the essays. So we'd have 6 or 7 essays, and only one of them came up.
Yeah.
So our class, we all did the same essay, and we all had learned it off by heart. So it was un tour à bicyclette.
Oh gosh, you remember
a trip on a bicycle.
Yeah.
And I remember, nous étions 5. We were 5. There were 5 of us.
Yeah.
So I maybe said, I'll change that a bit. Nous étions 3. And someone else, nous étions 6.
You're mixing things up a bit.
Ma bicyclette était jaune. It was yellow. Another fella had, his bicyclette was rouge. So suffice to say, we didn't do that well in the French.
So French was out.
So, but generally speaking, even though I was an A student in Irish and so on, that didn't count. If you were an A student in mathematics and applied maths and physics and chemistry, you were channeled by the Christian Brothers towards physics or chemistry or engineering in college. So my horizons were limited by the ambition as laid out for me in the Christian Brothers schools. If I had said to them, I want to do English, they would have said, what a waste of talent.
Yeah.
You're good at maths. You're clever. They never regarded someone who was good at English as being particularly clever.
You were channeling. Sorry, you were channeled.
Channeled, yeah.
What did you want?
I hadn't a clue. Sure, there was no career guidance really. What I've told you now, that was career guidance. That's all. Now I did apply for Irish Life, and I got offered a job as a trainee actuary.
Yeah.
Now, with apologies to all the actuaries listening, the idea of being an actuary for the rest of my life is the most boring, tedious offering I could possibly
just not an option.
Not an option. Okay. So I turned that down. Ray Bates was in my class, former head of the lottery.
Yeah.
He took a job with Irish Life, but he played the accordion.
Okay.
I'm not linking the two.
No, but you need an outlet, don't you? That's brilliant.
He had something else to divert.
Of course. So you went to University College Dublin, UCD, and you did engineering.
Engineering in Merrion Street, which is now, of course, Government Buildings.
Okay.
That was the College of Science.
Yeah.
most of the decent buildings in Dublin were left to us by our imperial masters, as it turns out.
There's a few of them listening in today, I'm sure. Now, tell me a little bit about what you were reading then as a student. Were you...
well, I mean, read all the things that you should read. Catcher in the Rye,
Kill a Mockingbird.
Catch-22. Kill a Mockingbird was maybe somewhat earlier in school.
Yeah.
Orwell. Then I discovered this kind of pretentious streak where I started to read Sartre.
Oh, wow.
The Roads to Freedom trilogy, the Age of Reason, The Reprieve, and Iron in the Soul. And this was all about Mathieu, a philosopher who, in the last volume, this is not a spoiler, well, maybe it is for people who never get to read The Roads to Freedom, he decides he's conscripted and he shoots someone.
He what? Oh, no.
He takes it upon himself to take a life.
Yes.
This was a massive journey for Mathieu. And it gave me a lot of pause for thought reading it, yeah. I also read Aldous Huxley, Eyeless in Gaza.
Yeah.
And I read Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, which was like a seminal, if you'll pardon that awful pun, feminist text.
Where was this coming from? Because you were doing engineering. You sound like you were in the English department hanging around, or was it just more enlightened?
We did hang around, but also we were members of the L&H. We were engineers, had their own society, which was not confined to engineering topics. We went to Dramsoc and UCD.
Okay,
I mean, so we were actually quite broad in our interests. Not everyone in engineering was, but there were a group of people who had, if you like, wider horizons.
But the way the reading list you've given us, I mean, suggests you're in the student bar with a beret and a galwaz. I mean, were you?
No. I mean, these were kind of things that were in the ether. I mean, don't forget there was a very good in what is now the Conrad Hotel. There was the Irish Sugar Club, where they had this cinema, and you'd have a season of French cinemas, of French movies, and we'd go to see the Eric Romer's Moral Tales. I mean, I just feel that there was more going on in our lives. And maybe we had more time to have all of this stuff going on.
What did your mum and dad make of this Sartre reading engineering student of theirs?
They'd prefer I cut my hair because it was down to my shoulders. I mean, I think they were glad that there was more going on in my life. But we weren't talking Sartre at the dinner table. That just didn't happen.
But you moved out of home eventually, did you?
Not until I went to Atlanta, Georgia.
Tell me about that. What brought you there?
An influence of a professor of mine, John Kelly, who's now sadly passed away recently. He was trying to encourage many of his students to try and get scholarships to American universities. So I applied under his advice to a number of universities. One of them was Oklahoma State University, I remember, and I turned it down on the basis that it was located in a dry state. I mean, it seems a very facile reason for turning a college down.
Not really. No, it's in our bones.
So I went to Atlanta, Georgia, and I remember the day I arrived on campus in Atlanta to Georgia Tech, I had a bird's eye view from on high of the quadrangle down below, and there were people drilling up and down in military uniforms. And I thought, holy God, how I not read the fine print. Have I enlisted in a military college? But it turned out it was the ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps drilling. It was part of the deal. You could join the Reserve Officer Training Corps and avoid the draft.
So that's
what American students were doing.
What year are we talking then?
1969-70.
Oh, so we're into Vietnam.
Vietnam War.
Well, truly, yeah.
And I mean, Kent State happened when 4 people were killed by the National Guard, shot dead by the National Guard in Kent State University while I was in...
While you were in America. So that would have had an impact on a young student.
Absolutely.
Like you
I wrote a poem, but I can't find it anymore, about the massacre in Kent State.
Did you write much poetry?
At the time I did. This is my pretentious phase.
That's okay, but a poet listening in would say, I don't see what's pretentious about writing poetry.
I don't know. I wrote sonnets. The other day I asked AI to write a sonnet.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
Yeah, but it's bullshit.
It's not bad. No, it wasn't bad. No, it wasn't bad at all.
Would they tell the difference, I wonder, between one of yours and one of theirs? Why are you laughing?
I don't know.
But I love that I didn't know that you wrote sonnets and poetry. I think that's really, I'm going to dare say it, sweet sounds disgusting, the kind of word for it, but it just sounds like it's very emotional and it's very tuned in. But I think you're smiling at me wistfully.
No, I was just thinking of a poem I did read that I would stand over if I could remember it all, but I can't recite it now. It was about a monkey and a pelican who lived at the zoo.
I love that.
And it was for children. And it was all about the monkey and the pelican. The pelican couldn't fly because the wings were clipped, and the monkey was envious of the pelican situation out in the open air.
I love that.
Yeah.
And did you write that for your own kids, or did you write it for yourself?
No kids.
At the time?
At the time, I just was. I was working on the pipelines in as a student engineer in. I was living in Market Harborough, and every day I spent my days out on the pipelines doing various work as a student engineer. And I remember writing these pieces of doggerel.
Yeah.
While I was doing my work during the day.
I love that. How would you characterize your American experience then overall, looking back?
Utterly life-changing.
Wow.
I learned in America, as we have all learned, that you can become anything you want to become.
Jeepers.
And you can be a con artist and become president. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, look at the cabinet of the clown car, some might say. But anyway.
So when I came back to Ireland, I realised that I could literally do anything. I wasn't confined.
Why? What did America do to you?
It was liberating in every sense of the word. I mean, one of the things that they allow in America, and I think it's now in UCD more than it used to be, you could do electives. So I did politics, for example, as an elective. I did nuclear power as an elective in Georgia Tech. I did music as an elective, classical music.
Of course, you love music. We'll get to that.
I love music, but I mean, I wasn't that familiar. Besides the bits and pieces that my father would have introduced me to, for example, he gave me. There was a collection that used to come out every week in Eason's, your mentors.
Yes.
It was of famous pieces of music. And my father bought this particular little album. It was a 10-inch long player.
Wow, unusual.
And it was of the Pastoral Symphony by Beethoven. And that opened the door to classical music for me. And that then led me on when I was in Georgia to listen to more Beethoven, Chopin, La Gazzaladra, I remember The Thieving Magpie.
Yeah.
Rossini. So
I love this.
All of this kind of broadened my horizons. So when I came back, I ended up picking up the guitar and singing songs in O'Donoghue's pub and doing things I never would have dared to do.
What songs were you singing?
Oh, folk songs mostly. And I wrote songs too. I entered for the Eurovision Song Contest one time.
What year?
Under the pen name Jason Guano. Guano being seagull shit. and the reason... The reason I entered was because my song was called Seagulls Are Flying. But it didn't make the cut.
What was the class? What class of gist was it?
It was a Seagulls Are Flying over the water, filling the skies with their loud screaming laughter while the lady walks lonely, the tears in her eyes dried by the wind. That's Jason Guano.
Long before Eric Cantona was talking about trawlers and seagulls.
Exactly.
Jason Guano was strumming songs in O'Donoghue's
The Lost Work.
The Lost Work of Jason Guano. I want to read that book. So did you put the song in for the Eurovision?
Oh yeah.
What year did you say it was? Sorry, some 19 something.
Probably 1972, 73.
But there's that's real devilment.
It was just mischief making.
What if they picked you?
That was before I actually applied for RT, which was in 1972. So it had to be 1971, I would imagine.
And you were playing all Dubliner songs and stuff. I know the folk songs or Dirty Old Town.
I mean, English folk songs, Irish folk songs. Yeah. I could not play the guitar, really. I mean, I was not a 3-chord trick man, but maybe a 5-chord trick man.
Yeah. 5 chords is pretty good compared to the 3.
Anyway.
Were you a handsome fella?
Who can judge oneself?
Well, let's say we judge by the amount of company you kept.
I kept a lot of company. I mean, O'Donoghue's was the place where all the tourists went. So it was, a happy hunting ground, shall we say.
Anyway, let's take you to broadcasting, because now you're an engineer, you're on the pipelines, writing sonnets, you're Jason Guano. This is an international man of mystery, and O'Donoghue's with your guitar. You obviously have this development and then a personality that suggests, okay, it's time to
change direction. I mean, I was teaching in Bolton Street in what is now TUD, and I was lecturing chemistry and physics and engineering students, but already after a couple of years doing it, the repetitive nature of it was beginning to bother me a bit as I'm, revisiting lecture notes from last year and so on. I also tried to teach the importance of chemistry to architectural students, which was a fruitless enterprise. I mean, I sent them out, to look at rust on railings and things like the old Georgian railings and how they were falling apart and why. I got them to make cement with different constituent amounts of sand and cement to make concrete, and sure, it was wasted on them.
Yeah.
Wasted on them entirely. So anyway, I saw an ad for part-time radio announcers in the Irish Times, applied, and was auditioned by RT in the GPO in Henry Street. Interesting, I've never been interviewed for any job ever in RT. I was always auditioned.
Oh, yes, of course. Different. Yes, the language, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't mean there was a difference.
Yeah.
It was an audition.
Yeah.
It wasn't what academic qualifications you had. It was how you spoke, how well you sold the script that you were given to read. That was what was important.
Yeah.
Not whether you went to UCD and did a PhD.
Yeah, love
that. Didn't count with them.
What is the book that you brought to us that made you cry? I'm interested.
It's a recent book, All the Colours of the Dark, Chris Whittaker.
Yeah, I read that last summer. I'm surprised by that choice. Interesting.
Yeah,
tell us about it and then we'll talk about it.
Well, it's a book, it's a saga really that goes, and it's about two characters principally. Patch, who is a young boy who is abducted, and his girl pal, Saint. And it's a missing person story. It's a story of a serial killer potentially, and it's an extraordinary love story. And it's a book that I didn't want to finish, but I had to finish. Wow. I was compelled. It's a long book. Yeah. And I didn't want to finish it because I was enjoying it so much.
And it's a page turner.
And I didn't want to finish it, but I did.
What was it doing to you or for you? Why was it making you...
Oh, I don't know.
What aspect of it?
The resolution. You're hoping against hope of resolution, but I daren't spoil it.
No, because people will read this one.
So the tears could be tears of joy or tears of sadness at the resolution of the book.
And it was
fantastic.
It was the language, the storytelling, all of that.
I mean, all of that, and the fact that, as I say, there are these two characters that you love them both equally, but they're flawed and they make mistakes, each one of them, and then
things happen. We four of us went to see Les Mis, Cillian Donnelly from a great Irish singer as Jean Valjean in Trieste recently. Yeah, I know, if you don't mind. And I turned around at one stage and all four of us were crying. And afterwards, the comment was...
Bring Him Home?
It was Bring Him Home, but there were other songs in it, and it was about grief and loss and sad. You know the score. Yeah. And I wouldn't have been much of a crier, but I did find myself definitely in tears.
And did he do it the same way as Colm did?
Yeah, because he takes
Colm
the notes.
Created the role of Jean Valjean.
He studied Colm.
Yeah.
So, you're in...
Colm became the template, and others did it, but not necessarily...
Cillian's got it. And
good, I'm delighted to hear.
I can't wait for you to see it. But the point I'm making is, the comment made afterward, isn't it beautiful that art can bring that out of you in the way that book brought it out of you?
Now, I omitted to say something which is very important way back when I'm talking about the books of my childhood.
Yeah.
I mentioned the uncles who passed me on Arthur Mee's encyclopedia. But there was one uncle in particular, Uncle Frank, my godfather, who is the father of Jane Casey, the thriller writer.
Well, how about that?
My cousin.
I didn't realise you were cousins.
Yeah, my uncle gave me, when we were young, he gave me all the books. They were buying them themselves as adults, and then they would pass them on to their nephews, particularly.
Yeah.
All the works of P.G. Wodehouse, Jeeves and Bertie Wooster, which gave us a love of language and the written language, and elegantly written and well written.
Yeah.
And that has stayed with me. And the other book that he gave me, which I'll never forget, is Guys and Dolls, a collection of stories by Damon Runyon.
Yeah.
And again, when you look at the characters that Damon Runyon created, like Harry the Horse, Nathan Detroit, I mean, it brings you to the present day when you've got the Dapper Don and the Monk and the Psycho. I mean, this was a genre started by Damon Runyon all those years ago. Yeah. So that was a bit of... the adult world coming into our childish world.
Great crossover.
Never forgot it. And I'm therefore not surprised that Jane is a writer.
And a crime writer at that.
And a crime writer.
Interesting enough. Let's talk a little bit about it. You get into RTE and you have this just extraordinarily successful career, largely into current affairs was Today, Tonight and so forth, which is essentially Panorama type program or Newsnight, more so. And then you're into the Late Late Show. You take over from...
Eurovision in between, don't forget.
Well, we can't forget the Eurovision because Jason... would have loved that. I mean, Jason Guano would have been with a smiling Riley from a cliff top somewhere, covered in seagull shit, thinking I had my chance. So you presented the Eurovision alongside
Michelle Rocca,
and
Celine Dion won.
I mean, come on,
that's a good story. But then she vanished, sort of without a trace, for a while, only to emerge as the pop superstar. Yeah.
Did you like her when you were?
She was lovely woman. Yeah. I mean, didn't spend a huge amount of time with her, but she was really nice. And then later on, she sent a video when I was given, an award.
A nod.
Yeah, Life Achievement Award.
Celine Dion.
Celine Dion, yeah.
And so you did 10 years of The Late Late Show?
10 years of The Late Late Show, 11 years before that of Kenny Live. They kind of are seamless almost, because you're doing a talk show on a Saturday night, and then you go into a talk show on a Friday night, and sometimes you say, was that a guest on The Late Late Show, or was that a guest on Kenny Live? Can't remember.
So to clarify for people who are kind of wondering, so Pat presented The Late Late Show. Gay Byrne did it for 37 years.
Yeah.
Pat did it for 10. I did it for 14. But you also did a Saturday night show. I did a Friday night show. That's irrelevant. And let's not lose them in the reeds of who produced what and who presented what at what point. Suffice to say, your tenure of it is characterised by what for you? Where does it lie in you?
Well, the first thing was keeping it alive. That was most important, because I was of the view that it was Gay's show and that it should have gone when Gay decided to retire. And then I was told by RT that they'd made a decision. It's going to carry on whether you like it or not, Sunshine. So you can stay with your Saturday night ruined for the foreseeable future, and we'll get someone else to present Friday night. And believe it or not, a young fella called Patrick Kilty was mentioned as a possible presenter at that time.
There were 2 PKs being discussed.
So I decided, well, if I'm going to end up wasting one day of the weekend, I prefer it be the Friday night, and I'll have my Saturday night and Sunday off.
So it was the Friday night, not the Late Late Show, that was the attraction.
Yeah, because
ultimately.
I had intentions that were it to come my way, that I was going to change it a little bit anyway.
Yeah.
I was told by Gay that one for everyone in the audience was a tyranny, that they were scratching around every week for stuff to give away, and that people would come along and you'd have a brilliant cast list, but you'd only have a bottle of Coca-Cola
Fake
and
tan.
a pack of Tato to give away.
Fake Tan was my one.
People would say, is that all?
Yeah, is that it? Yeah.
Is that all? Is that all you have for us? And, you'd have just delivered the most sparkling lineup of guests.
Yeah, forget about it.
And then another week you'd have a dud list of guests, but everyone would get a television set or something, and they'd all be delighted. So it was a tyranny. So we dropped it, except for the toy show.
Except for the toy show. God, the toy show too.
So the first thing was we helped it to survive and thrive ultimately.
Yeah.
That was the big achievement, as far as I was concerned. And I mean, I kept doing what I was doing, Kenny Live, having good guests, good conversation. That was it.
Did you get bored of it?
I had done 10 intros to the toy show. And I was beginning to think, where are we going to go next? I've been on the back of an elephant. I've been up in Lapland meeting Santa Claus. I've come in on a geodesic dome. I've been rolled in on one of those. I've climbed down the side of the television building. I've done all sorts of things. What more? But no, there comes a time when, and I remember Gay said to me, when I met him up in Dunlow, I was a guest. I was the presenter of the Mary of Dunlow, and he was a judge. And it was very trying and very stressful knowing that the great man, this is before I took over the Late Late Show, he was in the front row as the judge, and I'm there doing my stuff.
The kicker.
Yeah, the kicker was
the
there.
Inspector.
But I got away with it because something very funny happened. It was raining cats and dogs in Dunlow. And there was a leak in the roof. And drip, drip, drip. Who was it dripping down on? Gabo.
That's brilliant. So that was your material.
So funny, and that broke the ice, and
everyone laughed.
Everyone laughed.
So you left the Late Late Show ultimately, and were you relieved to see the back of it in it? And I say that in a complimentary way.
I wouldn't really have been happy going unless I had a safe haven to land in, because I wanted to continue doing television, and I got the opportunity to, if you like, design my own show. To replace questions and answers that John Bowman was presenting. So that's how the Frontline was born. And I had this idea that rather than have 4 politicians who were sitting up there being asked a question through the chair, blah, 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 that instead you would have the audience making most of the contributions and the panel having to listen to them. I thought it was a good switcheroo. And it became very dramatic, and obviously, it made a little bit of history with Michael D getting the presidency.
Indeed.
Yeah. Controversially, shall we say.
Well, there was again, we're going to have to give it a little, I suppose, a blurb at the back of a book. What happened there was it was a live debate. There was a presidential race, and there was a tweet sent to you from
sent to the program.
To the program.
And it was sent down to me from the box, and I read it out. And it was allegedly from Sinn Féin saying something or other. Sinn Féin subsequently said it wasn't from them, but the result of it was that
one candidate benefited from another man's misfortunes, if you like. How do you look back on that episode?
With a lack of satisfaction, because I don't think it was properly resolved, in the sense that some people ended up not faring well out of it who had no culpability whatsoever. I'll say no more than that.
That's okay. I'm not looking for that either. I'm not looking for lines here. I'm actually just looking for your own genuinely, feeling about, for example, when you left RTE ultimately. Was that a difficult departure, or was it a kind of shake hands, good luck departure?
Well, I mean, I had great conversations with Noel Curran at the end when I had decided to go. He was the Director General, and he made up a little book of photographs specially for me to say thanks for. And he said to me, you've done 40 years, you owe us nothing. So he was happy that I left, on friendly terms with him and all the rest of the gang. And I have no great animosity towards RTE at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there came a time, people look at it now and say my timing was impeccable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Given what unfolded subsequently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's again for another. Maybe when I'm sitting in your chair, we'll have further chats about that. But let's talk a bit about back to the books and, in the job that you do. This is kind of slightly, I'm nerding out here for a moment, but I'll just say it. In the job that you do is presenting a radio show 5 days a week on News Talk, and then in the job that you had in RTE, the amount of reading is just the demand. You talk to authors, you've got papers, you've got, documents to read constantly. I know you've got researchers and producers who are very helpful in that regard, but there you are. So how do you manage all of that?
I try to read as much of, certainly non-fiction books, I try to read as much as I can, because I can there find the things that I want to talk about to the authors. With fiction, I read to a point. I don't want to know the end of the story because I might give it away. Spoiler.
Yeah, when you're interviewing somebody, I agree with you, because the chances are you're reading a proof copy anyway.
Yeah,
the listeners don't know the ending, so you can't be all in cahoots.
But I don't want to give it away inadvertently. But I remember Gay saying to me one time that the problem with the job that we all do is that you read for work, and therefore some of the pleasure that you might get from reading those self-same books is diminished, because you're reading to a deadline and you're making notes as you read instead of... It's a bit like people who go to a concert and take the phone out and photograph the concert instead of being in the moment and enjoying it. So you're reading a book, but you're doing the interview in your head or preparing the interview in your head. So it's not the same as just sitting back and enjoying a book.
What's the name of the book that changed your life?
I'm not sure there is one that changed my life. I know you asked me to...
But I'm getting a sense from our chat that nearly every book you've mentioned had a life-changing moment within it. In fact, it's almost a process of books. You could bring in a selection of them, actually.
You could probably say that, reading Woodhouse as a child, might be the one that gave me a love of literature and reading and so on and so forth. I mean, Dickens was a great potboiler, great stories in your arms, but the elegance of Woodhouse might be, if you were to say, change my life. And my love of the spoken word, I like to be precise in my language.
Where did that come from?
That came from Woodhouse as well.
Did it really?
And an elocution teacher in O'Connell schools, which we all had, believe it or not. Her name was Joey Roach Burke.
And she was?
She was a little bird-like lady.
Really?
And she came in, and once a week we would all learn how to talk proper.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Did becoming a father change things dramatically for you? I mean...
Absolutely. A night and day. That's the way it is. And I mean, for all the parents listening, they know. But I have to hand all the accolades to Kathy. The job that I have been doing for all those years is so time-consuming that the heavy lifting went to her. I mean, I went through the moments where you're sitting at the cot with your hand clutching or being clutched by the hand of the child, and you think she's asleep, and you try to sneak away, and she grabs it again. But most of that, if not all of that heavy lifting, was done by Kathy.
To let you get
because
up in the morning early and have your all of faculties intact.
Yeah, and then you're missing for one day of the weekend for the bulk of the year. It's
that's
tough going.
I think that's one of the great things about leaving the chat show. was having your weekends back. It's not exactly a pressing problem for the world, but for as two
and then
people,
you find yourself Sunday reading the Sunday newspapers, and in my case, for my news talk program, 3 hours long on a Monday, I've got to do prep for Monday.
You've got to be your
I've got to know what's going on.
Can you give us the name of the autobiography you have yet to write, and what are you thinking? Where are you going for it?
I think I was thinking about this. What I would do, I'd have a book, beautifully presented with a picture of me on the cover, preferably a flattering one.
From what age would you be on this
Pat
cover,
Kenny,
on this picture?
Picture just me,
now,
maybe in front of a microphone.
Okay.
And you open the book and there's nothing inside, blank pages. And the title would be Nothing Left to Say.
Oh my God, that is so good. That's the first.
Nothing left to say.
Nothing left to say.
I've said it after 40 years spoofing on the radio. What more can I offer?
Pat Kenny, you've been very good to me in the last year or two when the waves were buffeting, and I want to say thank you to your face rather than behind your back.
It's fair.
It was good of you, and I appreciate it. My family appreciate it very much. And you've been a great mentor to young broadcasters, and I'm not so young anymore, but you were very good to me down through the years. And to many others, and anyone who works with you always says the nicest things about you. So that's not Plamos, that's the truth. It's been a real joy and a revelation to talk to you today, and maybe next year's Eurovision is on the cards.
Jason revisited.
Jason's back.
Ryan, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Pat. So here's this week's Ryan Recommends, brought to you by Eason, Ireland's favourite bookseller. I'm going to go with John Banville, The Drowned. Gosh, I love this book. He writes these two characters, Quirk and Strafford, so well. We're into 1950s, 60s Ireland, and even though I wasn't there ever, I just feel like he gets it right. You can smell the cigarettes in the pub. You can feel the smog on your face as these two guys go around to investigate the missing woman who's the centre of this story. The writing is so sumptuous. It is like eating a good meal. And it's not a very long meal either. So it's just right. I just thought this was perfect. Lovely autumn-winter read. John Banville, The Drowned. Go for it. And read the previous ones along the way if you can. This book and all the books we discuss on this episode of the podcast are available in your local Eason store, or you can order them online from easons.com before 6 p.m. for same-day dispatch with free delivery when you spend over a tenner. Eason, be inspired.